Mornings on Supertalk Mississippi. Dave Hughes here. And we are joined now by our old friend here on the network, the president and CEO of the Mississippi Center for Public Policy, Douglas Carswell, joins us. How are you doing this morning, Douglas?
Good morning, Dave. Good morning, Mississippi. It's great to be here.
It's always great to have you here. Now, let me just start with a fairly open-ended question, but I want your take on this. What in the heck's going on at the Capitol?
Good question. Good question. I think it's fair to sum up the session in two ways. It's first of all been quite frustrating, and we saw a press release from the Speaker that went out yesterday, and I think that reflected some of the frustration. Some of the pro-growth agenda that he and others have come up with has been blocked. Now, some of it's gotten through. We've had this extraordinarily tax reform, which means we're going to phase out the income tax over the next 10 years. Great news for making Mississippi more competitive. But it's been frustrating. So many of the other things that we could have done have been blocked. And I think this is the second story of the session. There are now clearly two very contrasting styles. You've got the pro-growth, pro-reform House behind the Speaker. And then you've got the forces of the status quo, the Senate, who, under the current leadership, want to do politics very differently. They come not with a plan for pro-growth. They come armed with a few cryptic interviews that don't really say what they believe. They come prepared to do backroom deals at the last minute. They come with no plan. They come intent upon killing pro-growth policies in committee. And I think what we've seen in this session is the two contrasting styles in conflict. I suspect that Mississippi's probably had enough of the sort of backroom deal way of doing things, and they want the openness, pro-growth that the Speaker and the House represent. But this is really the nub of the issue. This is why they're at loggerheads, and this is why they've failed to agree a budget.
Well, and, you know, just to make sure that we state this correctly, because I see a lot of people talking about, you know, you've been there for over 3 months now, and you wait to the last minute to do the budget. Now, true, first day of the session, you can't start the budget because there's going to be legislation passed and other things worked on that may change the financial figuring to some extent. So you can't start out of the gate with it, but you don't have to wait to the last minute every time.
Basically what happened is the Senate tried to do it all at the last minute, literally over a weekend, with cozy deals where they all the good old boys get in the room and they basically carve up your tax dollars, and it's all, you know, you scratch my back, I scratch yours. And I think Mississippi's had enough of that kind of politics. And I think the House made it clear they're not going to do that. This is serious money. This is $7 billion of your money, and we owe it to the taxpayers of Mississippi to do this properly. And the failure of the Senate to realize this, I think, reflects very badly on them. And I think quite rightly the House refused to play that game. So sadly, because of the Senate leadership, there is now going to have to be a special session. But quite rightly, the governor is going to call a special session, and this needs to be done, and it needs to be done properly, it needs to be done openly, and it needs to be done so that you, the taxpayer, can see what they're doing with your dollars.
Well, and that's, to me, one of the benefits of calling a special session for this and this situation, because, well, there's nothing else to mix it in with and hide behind. That's all they're doing when they come back.
Yep, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I really hope, and it would serve the leadership of the Senate quite right, if the governor, and I hope he does, I hope if the governor and his team are listening to this, they have the courage to put on the special session not just the budget, but all of those other pro-growth policies that the House proposed and the Senate leadership intentionally killed in committee, like school choice, like certificate of need reform, like the ballot initiative. All of these things that the House leadership intentionally killed in committee this session. Wouldn't it be lovely if they were put on the agenda for the special session and we could see them come out and explain to the voters, their primary voters in a few years' time, why it is that they don't want this pro-growth agenda. I think the Senate has in danger of shooting itself in the foot, but they brought this on themselves.
Well, and to me, this seems to me to be the atmosphere right now. If we've seen nothing else on the national level, on the state level, everything, for some reason, Republicans get control, and then it falls apart because of intramural squabbling.
Well, it only falls apart, Dave, if it doesn't fall apart if all the Republicans unite behind a free market conservative liberty-orientated agenda. It does fall apart if some Republicans seem to govern more in common with what you might expect from sort of Nancy Pelosi. You're familiar with that wonderful American movie and book, The Wizard of Oz. It's a great classic. And the great premise of the movie is that, Dorothy and her friends are building up to that moment when they get to the Emerald City and they meet the great Oz. And I wonder if this session is a little bit like that. We've finally got to meet the great Oz, and you pull back the curtain and the great Oz is not this political wizard. It's rather confused senators not quite knowing where to put the decimal point. And I think we've had a Wizard of Oz moment in Mississippi politics, and I don't think it's ever going to be the same again. I think the credibility of some of these people has taken a catastrophic tumble.
Let me just say thank you for that. I'm going to spend the entire weekend trying to figure out who the flying monkeys are. That's where you took my brain, Douglas.
There are plenty of flying monkeys.
Oh, yeah, they're everywhere. There are swarms of them at this point, it feels like. How do we fix this moving forward? We've got the special session coming. Hopefully that'll solve some of this, but I hate to look this far down the road, but next session, how do we avoid the same thing happening again?
Sunlight. I think the Speaker has got to carry on with his new style. Remember, he brought about this radical transformation in our tax system, not by a backroom deal, but by having an open meeting in which he invited every Mississippian. I was there. There were more than 500 people turned up, and it was a fascinating conversation. It was a genuine discussion. I mean, there were people disagreeing openly, and out of that, Trey Lamar came up with a great plan. It was improved on. That's the style that needs to carry Mississippi forward, this openness and this, as the Speaker put it in his brilliant remarks yesterday, a willingness to rock the boat, not taking the status quo any longer. Because I think any Mississippian under the age of 40 is fed up with this good old boy system. And I think they want this openness and they want the pro-growth policies that the governor and the Speaker are now behind. So I think more of the same, more openness, more frankness, more candor. Sunlight is the best disinfectant. And I think the roadblock to reform in this process, I think, is going to learn, perhaps the hard way, that actually that style of politics belongs to a century that has now gone.
Well, and it is a different time. There are different circumstances. It's a different economy. Everything is different. Yeah. And it calls to mind the old chestnut that the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results.
And how can you expect to make a decision about $7 billion worth of taxpayer money with backroom deals at the last minute over the weekend? I mean, are you doing that because you think that's a sensible way of doing it? Are you doing it because the lobbyists want you to do it that way? Come on, that's no way to run a state government. And fortunately, we now have a special session that I think will allow us to do the budget properly. But I really hope, I repeat the point, I really hope that the governor adds onto the agenda for the special session some of the other issues that some people in the Senate intentionally blocked. Let them come out and openly say to voters in Mississippi, not, oh, this died in committee. Let them come out and say, we don't want you to have the ballot initiative. We don't want to deregulate the healthcare economy. Let them come out and say, we don't want you to have the school choice that every family in every one of the surrounding states around that borders Mississippi now have. Let's have a special session that forces them to do that. I don't think they'll have the courage.
I was about to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think the odds are of that happening?
Better than they were 48 hours ago. I mean, I think the Senate has kind of slightly brought this on themselves. I think their obstinacy, their refusal to extend the rules, to avoid suspend the rules, to avoid a special session. I mean, I think it's been one blunder after another by the Senate in their own terms. I'm not just talking about not knowing how to do basic math. I mean, they've blundered and blundered again, and they've doubled down on their blunder. And if they're listening to this, they'll probably, like the Bourbons, forgive nothing and learn nothing. But, I think the rest of us want to see some of this pro-growth reform. So it would be lovely if that was included in the special session.
You're talking about the conference weekend, the session where they usually get together and slap the budget together at the last minute, as we've said. I think there's another factor in that. You talk about backroom deals and carving it up and everything. I think there's another factor that we have to consider, and that is they were trying to do it that way because they've always done it that way.
Yeah, and it probably suits some people to keep their cards very close to their chest, to be thought of as being frightfully important, to be wined and dined by the lobbyists, to only ever say things cryptically. I mean, it kind of feels good if you're a politician and you can do that, but it doesn't really serve the rest of us. The candor that we're getting from Jason White and from Trey Lamar and that new generation of state leaders is exactly what we need to fix some of these problems, not cryptic candor and backroom deals at the weekend. So I think there's a fundamental shift. Actually, all the frustrations in this session, I think this is a watershed session. I don't think politics in Mississippi is going to be what it was before after this session.
We're concentrating our time on making sure we do the best job possible to lose you an invitation to any Senate luncheons. And I think we're accomplishing that so far, Douglas.
Well, one's not making the case for pro-growth policies because you want to be invited into the Senate. You're doing it because it's what Mississippi needs. We don't need to be 50th out of 50. I mean, if you look at the recent data showing per capita GDP growth in the last quarter of last year, Mississippi is the second fastest growing state in America. If we had a bit more pro-growth policies, we wouldn't be 50th out of 50 for very long.
Yeah, and we've talked about it before. On your X profile, X, Twitter, whatever we're calling it this week, your pinned post, you have something that you posted back in December showing those GDP numbers and showing that Mississippi is ahead of the United Kingdom.
Yep, Mississippi is not only in per capita GDP terms, that's the economic value per person in Mississippi. We've not just overtaken the UK, we're overtaking Germany this year. Mississippi will be a more prosperous place than Germany this year. But I measure it against other states in America. Mississippi shouldn't be, and we shouldn't put up with the idea that we have to be 50th out of 50. We're 50th out of 50 because we've had bad policy, and we change the bad policy and we get good pro-growth policy like we're seeing, we will grow. And I think this is when I first spotted the data 3 months ago, I wrote and tweeted about it, and various people said to me, no, this is nonsense. I'm delighted to see that the governor is now majoring on this idea that Mississippi is one of the fastest growing states in America, because it's not just him saying it, it's the data saying it. It's the truth. Now, it could just be a snapshot, but eventually a series of snapshots becomes a trend, and I think we're starting to see this trend now.
Well, and that to me is the problem, and it goes back to what we were talking about and the point I brought up, that conference weekend was expected to happen this time because that's the way we've always done it. We have to get out of the mindset of, well, my mama and my grandmama did it this way, so it's good enough for me. We have to be willing to change things to get different results.
You're not going to get the growth that you want and the services that you want and the efficient government at Mississippi state level that you want if you make decisions about how to spend $7 billion of taxpayer money every year over the weekend with backroom deals. You're just not. And it's good to see that the House leadership gets this, which is why they wanted a proper budget process. But, there are a whole bunch of things. We talk about some of the successes of the session, and, abolishing the income tax is absolutely, it's game-changing. It's